Before we begin, subscribe for more chilling stories and tell me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Ethan had always craved silence after the chaos of city life in Boston, where the horns blared like accusations and the sidewalks pulsed with strangers' hurried steps. He found solace in the sleepy town of Willow Creek, Vermont, a place where maples arched over cracked pavement and the nearest neighbor was a half-mile hike through whispering pines. The house he bought was a weathered colonial on Elm Street, its gray clapboard peeling like old skin, but the listing promised 3 acres of untouched woods and a wraparound porch that creaked under the weight of forgotten summers. The realtor, a wiry woman named Clara with eyes like polished stones, handed him the keys with a smile that didn't reach her corners. "It's got character," she said, her voice thin as the autumn air. Ethan nodded, imagining evenings with a book by the fireplace, no more shared walls or midnight arguments filtering through vents. He moved in on a drizzly October afternoon, hauling boxes up the sagging stairs, his boots leaving muddy prints on the oak floors that groaned like they were sharing a secret. The inspector had cleared it, solid beams, updated wiring from the 80s, no termites gnawing at the bones. By nightfall, he collapsed onto a futon in the living room, the house settling around him with soft sighs from the rafters. Sleep came easy that first night, unbroken by the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves scraping the window panes. Mornings blurred into routines of black coffee brewed on a hot plate and walks along the overgrown path behind the house, where ferns brushed his jeans like curious fingers. It was on the 5th day, while rummaging through the attic for extra blankets against the deepening chill, that he uncovered the shadow box. Tucked behind a stack of yellowed National Geographics, it was an antique oval frame, its glass fogged with age, enclosing a faded sepia photograph of a man in a stiff collar, staring out with eyes that seemed to follow the light. Ethan wiped the dust away with his sleeve, revealing intricate silver filigree around the edges, etched with vines that twisted like veins. He carried it downstairs, propping it on the mantel above the cold hearth. The man's face was stern, lips pressed thin, but something about the angle made Ethan's neck prickle, as if the gaze lingered a beat too long after he turned away. He dismissed it as the house's quirks, the way old places played tricks on new owners, shadows stretching unnaturally in the slanting sun. That evening, as twilight bled purple through the lace curtains, Ethan poured a glass of bourbon and sank into the armchair, the floorboards popping like distant gunfire. He glanced at the shadow box, and for a split second, the man's mouth curved upward, a subtle lift that vanished when Ethan blinked. His pulse quickened, fingers tightening around the glass stem. It was the light, he told himself, refracting off the uneven pain, or perhaps his own fatigue from unpacking until his back ached. He covered it with a dish towel and went to bed early, the house humming with the low drone of crickets outside. But sleep fractured around midnight, pulling him awake with a jolt, his skin clammy as if he'd surfaced from underwater. The room was pitch, save for the sliver of moon slicing through the blinds, and in that pale glow, he swore he heard a faint rustle from downstairs, like fabric shifting over wood. He lay still, breath shallow, waiting for the wind to explain it away. It didn't. The next morning, sunlight flooded the living room, banishing the unease, and Ethan uncovered the shadow box with forced nonchalance. The man's face stared back, stern as ever, no trace of that fleeting grin. He laughed it off over breakfast, scrawling job listings on his laptop for remote editing gigs, the kind that let him hole up without facing the world's clamor. By afternoon, curiosity won. He researched the frame online, tracing its style to a Victorian mourning portrait from the 1890s, keepsakes for the grieving to commune with the lost. Willow Creek's history flickered in forum posts, mill workers vanishing into the woods, whispers of a photographer who captured souls too vividly, his subjects claiming echoes in their dreams. Ethan closed the tab, shaking his head at small-town lore. Dusk fell early, painting the walls in bruised hues, and he lit a fire in the grate, flames dancing shadows across the mantel. As logs crackled, he watched the box, half expecting nothing, half dreading the tilt of lips. It came subtly. The man's eyes seemed to brighten, pupils dilating like ink in water. And then the mouth, stretched into a grin wide and knowing, teeth gleaming unnaturally white against the sepia fade. His chair scraped back, bourbon spilling across his thigh in a warm stain. He leaned closer, heart thudding against his ribs, but the smile held for only a breath before flattening, the face inert once more. His reflection in the glass overlaid the portrait, his own features pale and drawn, eyes wide with a fear he couldn't name. He snatched the towel, draping it thickly, but the fabric felt insufficient, like a veil over something insistent and alive. That night he bolted the doors and windows, the house's silence now oppressive, pressing in like a held breath. Sleep evaded him until exhaustion dragged him under, only to shatter at 2:47 a.m. with the sound of tapping, soft, deliberate, like nails on glass, from the living room. He fumbled for the lamp, its bulb flickering to life, casting jagged pools of yellow. The towel lay rumpled on the floor, the shadow box exposed, the man's grin frozen in the lamplight, wider now, as if savoring the interruption. He stumbled back, bare feet cold on the planks, and in his haste, knocked over a side table, the crash echoing like a confession. He righted it, hands trembling, and fled upstairs, barricading his bedroom door with a chair wedged under the knob. Dawn crept in gray and reluctant, birdsong a mocking cheer outside. Over coffee, he debated smashing the thing, but sentiment, or was it dread, stayed his hand. It was an antique, after all, worth something to collectors. Instead, he wrapped it in bubble wrap and stowed it in the hall closet, shoving boxes in front like sentinels. The day passed in forced normalcy, a hike through the woods where pines loomed like silent judges, their needles muffling his footsteps. But paranoia seeded, blooming in sidelong glances at every reflective surface, the toaster's chrome edge, the darkened TV screen, half convinced his own face might twist into that mocking arc. That evening, rain lashed the panes and sheets, and he cooked pasta on the ancient stove, steam fogging the kitchen window. As he wiped it clear, his reflection grinned back from the glass, independent of his scowl. The pot boiled over, hissing like laughter, and he dropped the sponge, water pooling at his feet like spilled secrets. He unplugged the stove, ate cold leftovers, standing up and retreated to the porch, rain soaking his shirt until shivers racked him. Inside again, he checked the closet, the shadow box secure, wrap intact. But sleep came fitful, dreams laced with grinning faces dissolving into smoke. He woke sweating at 2:47. The tapping resumed, not from below, but closer, scratching at the bedroom door like insistent fingers. The chair held, but in the morning, he found faint gouges in the wood, thin as whispers carved by nails.
Days blurred into a tense vigil, Ethan avoiding the living room altogether, meals taken in the kitchen under harsh fluorescence that buzzed like trapped wasps. He called his old friend Marcus in Boston, voice steady as he spun a tale of minor plumbing woes, anything to skirt the truth. Marcus laughed, promised a visit soon, oblivious to the undercurrent of desperation in Ethan's replies. The gouges on the door mocked him each dawn, lengthening subtly, as if the thing inside was patient, methodical. He sanded them down one afternoon, sawdust drifting like ash, but by evening, fresh lines etched deeper, curving into what might have been a smile if viewed askew. Paranoia coiled tighter, his mind replaying buried guilts, the car accident 2 years back, the screech of brakes on wet asphalt, his wife's hand limp in his after the paramedics pulled her away. He'd walked from the wreckage unscathed, but the jury of his thoughts convicted him nightly, whispering that he'd swerved too late, driven too fast to outrun the argument's venom. Now, this house amplified it, shadows pooling in corners like accusations unspoken. He ventured into town for supplies, Willow Creek's Main Street a ribbon of faded awnings and the general store's bell tinkling like a warning. Old Mr. Hargrove behind the counter eyed the shadow box photo Ethan slid across. Had he seen this face before? Hargrove's brows furrowed, fingers tracing the grin Ethan had cropped out. "Looks like Elias Crow," he muttered, voice gravelly from pipe smoke. "Photographer, back in '92. Hung himself in these woods after his wife drowned in the creek. Folks said his pictures trapped more than memories. Stole smiles from the living, gave them to the dead." Ethan forced a chuckle, pocketing the print, but the drive home twisted through fog-shrouded lanes. The rear view showed his eyes hollow, haunted. That night, thunder rolled in from the Green Mountains, lightning fracturing the sky like broken glass. Ethan nailed plywood over the closet door, hammer strikes echoing his pounding heart, splinters biting his palms. Rain drummed relentless, and he huddled in the attic, surrounded by dust motes swirling in flashlight beams, unearthing trunks of moth-eaten linens that smelled of mildew and regret. A loose floorboard yielded a lettered journal, pages brittle, Elias Crow's script spilling confessions, visions in his dark room, subjects' reflections grinning back autonomous, mocking his failures until the creak called him home. Even slammed it shut, pulse roaring, and descended to find the plywood splintered inward, shards like teeth on the floor. The shadow box sat open on the mantel, unwrapped, the man's grin vast now, stretching ear to ear, eyes locked on the stairs as if awaiting his descent. Ethan backed away, breath ragged, and fled to the car, keys fumbling in the downpour. He drove to the creek's edge, a black ribbon under storm-lashed willows, tires crunching gravel as thunder clapped overhead. The box heavy in his lap, he smashed it against a rock, glass shattering in a spray of silver shards, the portrait curling in the mud like a dying leaf. Lightning illuminated the fragments, and for a heartbeat, every piece grinned up at him, fragmented but unified in malice. He buried them deep, soil cold and yielding under his nails, rain washing away the evidence. Back at the house, soaked and shivering, he bolted every door, collapsing into dreamless sleep as the storm waned to drips. Morning brought deceptive calm, sun gilding the woods gold, birds flitting unperturbed. Even packed essentials, listing the house online with a cart note about sudden relocation. But as he taped boxes, a chill slithered down his spine. The hallway mirror, long ignored, caught his eye. His reflection stared back, stern, until it tilted into a grin, slow and deliberate, teeth too sharp, eyes gleaming with Crow's borrowed glee. He smashed it too, porcelain raining like brittle bones, but shards on the floor rearranged themselves in the afternoon light, forming a mosaic mouth curved in eternal amusement. Panic crested, he called Marcus, babbling fragments of truth, and by dusk his friend arrived, truck rumbling up the drive. They loaded what they could, Marcus chalking the frenzy to isolation, but as they drove away, Ethan glanced back. The porch light flickered on unbidden, illuminating the open front door where shadows writhed, coalescing into a silhouette that waved, its face a void grinning wide. Months later, in a cramped Boston apartment alive with sirens and chatter, Ethan awoke at 2:47 nightly, the tapping now internal, a rhythm in his veins. He avoided mirrors, but in every window's gleam, every polished knife, his shadow grinned independently, whispering guilts he drowned but couldn't bury, the swerve too late, the hand he couldn't hold. Marcus visited once and found him muttering to empty corners and left with a worried frown. Ethan burned the journal in a park barrel, pages curling like smiles, but ashes scattered on the wind reformed in his dreams, Elias Crow's eyes watching, patient, eternal. The grin followed, not in glass or frame, but etched in the dark behind his lids, a shadow cast by regrets too heavy to outrun. In quiet moments, staring at the ceiling's cracks, he felt it pull, that inexorable curve of lips, inviting him to join the creek's embrace, where drowned things smile forever beneath the current. Owen had traded the relentless clamor of Boston's Back Bay for the fog-draped quiet of Salem, Massachusetts, where colonial facades loomed like silent witnesses and the harbor's salt tang clung to every cobblestone. The duplex he purchased stood on Chestnut Street, a narrow red brick sentinel from the 1880s, its gables peaked like accusatory fingers against the perpetual overcast. He claimed the East Wing, a warren of high-ceilinged rooms with warped pine floors and wallpaper peeling like shed skin, while the West lay fallow, its windows shuttered against prying eyes. The broker, a sharp-featured woman named Evelyn with a voice like rustling leaves, dangled the keys with a tight smile. "Prime location," she murmured. "The other half's been empty since the last tenant vanished mid-lease. Keeps things peaceful."
Owen envisioned restoring the vacant side for income, a buffer against freelance graphic gigs that barely covered his debts, far from the subway's metallic grind and the echo of his ex-wife's parting words that still rattled in his skull. He arrived under a slate November sky, van groaning to a halt on the uneven drive, the east door yielding with the groan that resonated through the shared spine. The inspector had deemed it sound, load-bearing joists reinforced against nor'easters, copper lines snaking unseen like dormant serpents, no lead lurking in the pipes. Dusk bled indigo through lace-curtained bays as he unpacked crates of monitors and sketch pads, the percolator hissing steam on the enameled stove, and he collapsed onto the sagging divan, the harbor's distant buoy bell tolling like a metronome. Night settled into uneasy rhythm, pre-dawn sketches by lamplight where shadows pooled in corners like spilled ink, and afternoons lost in digital layers, pixels blurring under his bleary gaze. It began on the third eve, as frost etched filigree on the panes, a low thrum seeping through the parlor's partition wall at precisely 11. Not the house's natural creaks or the radiator's sporadic clanks, but a uniform drone, mechanical and insistent, like a projector warming to life. Owen paced the room, ear pressed to outlets and baseboards, the vibration strongest where the wall met the mantel, a faint tremor syncing with his pulse. He dismissed it as a neighbor's furnace or the street's buried conduits, but the thrum persisted nightly, commencing sharp at 11 and fading at dawn's first blush. He queried Evelyn via email, her reply curt. The West unit stood unoccupied, utilities severed, no activity since the prior owner's abrupt departure. Echoes play tricks in these old divides, she wrote. Owen knew his wing's idiosyncrasies by then. The floor sighs underfoot, the drafts whispering through keyholes. This pulsed deeper, engineered, a heartbeat from the void. On the ninth night, amid a squall lashing the eaves, the drone birthed a secondary cadence, a staccato tap, deliberate as Morris, followed by a mechanical whir, rising like a reel uncoiling. Owen's spine stiffened, memories of his grandfather's attic reel-to-reel flickering unbidden, spools capturing voices long silenced. He flattened his palm to the plaster, feeling the subtle judder, cool surface warming under his touch as if fed from within. Sleep eluded him, the room closing in with the scent of damp wool and ozone. Morning clawed gray through the blinds, and Owen circled the duplex's perimeter, boots crunching frost-laced gravel, the west door's brass knocker tarnished, its frame bearing faint gouges like hasty repairs. Windows stared blank, mullions sealed with layers of paint that cracked like old veins. He dialed Evelyn again, voice edged with insistence. She promised a locksmith by weekend. That eve, as thunder grumbled offshore, the thrum ignited 2 ticks shy of 11, and Owen hunkered by the wall, breath shallow, when footsteps echoed, slow, measured, pacing the length of the adjoining parlor. He froze, the taps resuming, sharper now, like keys striking ivory. Then the whir swelled, and a voice pierced the barrier. Baritone, avuncular, laced with wry amusement. "Evening, friend. You've kept vigilant watch." A reply murmured, tenored and fractured, words dissolving into plaster's muffling embrace. The first voice chuckled softly. "Time we shared a proper tale." Owen recoiled, shoulder clipping the side table, lamp crashing to the rug in a bloom of shards that glittered like accusations. He righted himself in the gloom, heart hammering, as a dialogue unfolded in fragments, queries laced with probing intimacy, responses hesitant, laced with pleas Owen couldn't parse. He fetched a tumbler from the sideboard, pressing its rim to the wall in futile espionage, the glass amplifying only his ragged breaths amid the veiled exchange. Periodically, the whir halted with a click, silence yawning brief, then resumed, voices threading anew like a ritual incantation. At dawn's pallid creep, the drone extinguished, leaving the parlor oppressively still. Owen slumped against the baseboard, sweat cooling to chill on his skin. He refrained from summoning authorities, the report too nebulous. Machinery in a forsaken annex? Instead, he scoured online forums for Salem's spectral lore, threads whispering of the duplex's shadowed past, a watchmaker who vanished in the 70s, his recordings of confessions unearthed in the walls, drawing the unwary into nocturnal dialogues. Paranoia seated, blooming in sidelong glances at the partition, its faded floral paper seeming to undulate faintly in peripheral vision. The locksmith arrived midweek, a burly man named Harlan with tools that clinked like wind chimes, breaching the west door amid a gust that stirred dust motes into spectral swirls. The air hung stagnant, redolent of machine oil and mildewed velvet, rooms echoing empty under bare bulbs that flickered reluctant to life. No furnishings scarred the floors, no outlets hummed, yet in the parlor, opposite the shared wall, a pale rectangle scarred the oak planks, dimensions evoking a bulky phonograph cabinet, edges frayed as if dragged in haste. Harlan grunted, flipping the fuse panel's levers, circuits cold and inert. "Nothing here," he said, scratching his beard. "Ghost in the wires, maybe." He rebored the locks, steel biting wood with finality, and departed into the mist. Owen lingered, tracing the scar with his boot, a chill radiating upward like buried regret. The ex-wife's voicemail he deleted unread, her voice cracking on accusations of neglect that mirrored his father's abandonment decades prior. That eve, 11 struck with monastic precision, the thrum ignited unbidden, and Owen watched a chair beneath his door, the voices commencing sharper, the baritone probing. "Tell me, what weighs on your silence?" The tenor faltered, a whisper of Owen's cadence bleeding through, or so paranoia insisted, guilt coiling tight as the reel spun unseen.
Days compressed into a taut surveillance, Owen shunning the parlor's embrace, meals devoured in the dim kitchen under the sway of a pendant bulb that buzzed in covert alliance with the partition's pulse. He confided in his cousin Theo via encrypted chat, fabricating yarns of faulty HVAC and reclusive drift, his replies laced with feigned levity that cracked like thin veneer. Theo sensed the undercurrents, urging a visit, but Owen deflected with weather dispatches and pixelated proofs dispatched in hurried bursts. The scarred planks in the west parlor bore fresh indentations by morn's light, fine as all pricks, curving into glyphs that hinted at spools if squinted upon. He sanded them smooth one drizzly noon, dust veiling the air like incense, but twilight unveiled renewed markings, deeper, scripting listener in erratic script. Doubt suppurated, psyche dredging submerged indictments, the divorce's venom, his ex's pleas ignored amid deadline haze, the father's shadow fleeing without a trace, leaving Owen to shoulder the void's inheritance. The duplex amplified these reverberations, laugh-murmuring rebukes in the draft's sigh. He ventured to Salem's Historical Society, a tempered archive exhaling vellum must and phantasmal hush, poring over ledgers beneath the archivist's hooded gaze. The duplex's dossier surfaced, Elias Thorne, horologist of ill repute who inked packs with the unseen via wax cylinders, his 78 disappearance yielding only fragmented reels in the eaves, ensnaring auditors and perpetual colloquy. Owen's cursor trembled, the ledger's entry timestamp aligning with his father's vanishing. 11 sharp, the hour of the unanswered call that sealed his solitude. Coincidence, he averred, yet the trek home devolved through pea soup fog, wipers slashing futile arcs, the rear view beating with condensation that traced friend in vaporous script. Nightfall swaddled Chestnut Street and Ebony, a gale keening from the Atlantic, shutters battering like insistent knuckles. Owen fortified the east door with deadbolts anew, torque wrench bites echoing the tempest's wail, muscles straining against the implacable. In the attic, he unearthed a cedar trunk of his lineage, letters from the ex yellowing like bruises. You listened to nothing but your screens, just as he listened to none of us. He torched them in the hearth, flames ravenous on foolscap, into an acrid pyre that coiled like specters, yet ashes vortexed upward, reconstituting in the flue as Elias's timber. Evening, friend, the silence confesses. Delirium surged. Owen assaulted the partition's facade, crowbar wedging lath with desperate pry, splinters drawing blood that wept like indictments. Beneath lurked not machinery, but a niche resounding the baritone, faint and manifold. Share your tale, the real hungers. He staggered, plaster cascading like brittle resolve, and fled to the harbor's edge, gale-whipped docks treacherous underfoot, lighthouse beam fracturing the squall to unveil silhouettes in the spindrift. Elias's stooped form, arm extended, yoked with his father's translucent shade, eyes hollow with unspoken blame. Owen teetered on the pier's brink, abyss churning ink below, the Nor'wester's adjuration paternal in its fury, but a rogue swell doused him, bruising ribs on bollard.
Soaked and gasping, he lurched duplexward, barricading in the attic amid crates of mildewed blueprints reeking of brine and remorse. The gale crested at midnight, rafters chanting dirge, and at 11 the thrum burgeoned from the divide, Elias's baritone swelling to exhortation that shivered the joists. Friend, unburden, the voices absolve nothing. Owen descended in the pre-dawn interlude, sledge quivering in grasp, and sundered the niche, lath rupturing like frail covenants. The recess gaped, dust cloth shredded, a brass phonograph enthroned on trestle of warped plank, cylinder whirring frenzied, horn disgorging layered litanies. Elias's interrogations entwined with his own, the X's recrimination veining through like silver thread. He demolished it then, sledge arcing in frenzied sweeps, brass buckling like foil, wax fracturing into obsidian pearls that scattered like fleeing souls. The gale shattered with the final impact, quiescence flooding like receding tide, leaving only the buoys in different clang. Dawn fractured opalescent, orbs splintered on wave crests, gulls wheeling in sardonic freedom. Owen listed the duplex unseen, packing monitors and percolator into the van, Chestnut Street dwindling in the glass like discarded husk. But as he crested the bridge to the mainland, a whir stirred in the glove box, a stray cassette, its shell mouth exhaling Elias's lilt. Evening, friend, the road attends too. Months later, in a bustling Cambridge flat alive with tea-line rumble and cafe murmur, Owen rose at 11 nightly, the thrum a cadence in his veins, voices murmuring through walls and vents. He shunned audio, but every podcast glitch birthed echoes, Elias's query layering with his father's faint summons, drawing him to overpasses spanning Russian culverts where the current crooned of release. Theo visited, found him etching spectral dialogues in margin notes, and pressed therapy's measured light, but Owen waved it off with a smile frayed at edges. He pulverized the cassette in the Charles' one fog-veiled dusk, shards sinking like weighted truths, yet ripples etched sigils on the surface. Unburden. The colloquy endured, not in wax or horn, but in the woven to the gale's breath, the rain's patter, beckoning him to the verge where confession drowned in the deep. In hushed vigils, tracing cracks in the ceiling like circuits, he felt the draw, inexorable as tide. Elias's arm extended through the veil, his own guilts surfacing like buoys, the call he couldn't answer, the ex he couldn't heed, the father he couldn't reclaim. The real summoned eternal, a chorus of the unheard, waiting for his voice to join the spin.
Clara had forsaken the ceaseless din of Philadelphia's Fairmount row houses, where fire escapes rattled with midnight arguments and the Schuylkill's hum blended with siren wails into a perpetual insomnia. She sought sanctuary in the leaf-shrouded lanes of Willowbrook, Pennsylvania, a hamlet of clapboard relics nestled against the Brandywine Valley's rolling swells, where sycamores arched like vaulted ribs over cracked macadam. The cottage she claimed huddled on Laurel Lane, a squat rancher with sage-green siding flaking like old verdigris, its stoop fringed by unkempt boxwoods that whispered in the slightest breeze. Only one domicile intruded on the seclusion, a gaunt Victorian manse adjacent, its turrets piercing the canopy like skeletal spires, foreclosed and forsaken for nigh on 6 years, weeds reclaiming the lawn in thorny dominion. The agent, a bespectacled man named Victor with a timbre like creaking hinges, tendered the deed with a perfunctory nod. Utter tranquility, he assured, no encroachments, save the wood's murmur. Clara pictured eaves steeped in chamomile, canvases awakening under her brush to the valley's veiled contours, remote from the gallery's caustic critiques, and the echo of her lover's slammed door that lingered like a bruise. She alighted amid October's copper haze, hatchback sputtering to rest on the weedy verge, the latch sighing open to exhale dust motes dancing in slantwise sun. The assessor had vouched for stability, cinderblock footings unyielding to frost heave, PVC veins threading the slab like unseen tributaries, no asbestos veiling the ducts. Twilight unfurled ochre through gingham drapes as she arrayed her meager trove, a pallet on the scarred trestle, a kettle crooning on the induction coil, and yielded to the futon sway, the valley's nocturnal chorus a soporific veil of katydids and rustling underleaf.
cycles wove in hushed cadence, matinal strolls along rivulet paths where dew silvered fern fronds and noon surrendered to pigment washes, hues bleeding like confessions in the sunroom's diffused prism. It kindled on the 14th dusk as equinoctial chill nipped the air, a pallid luminescence blooming in the manse's attic casement at stroke of one. Subdued, akin to a candle guttering behind frost-laced quartz, it kindled unwavering till cockcrow's pallid creep. Clara ascribed it to vagrants or appraisers, perhaps a caretaker's lantern swaying in draught, yet the vigil recurred nocturnally, ignition precise as a chronometer, no conveyance crunching the gravel approach, no silhouettes traversing the gloaming. On the Sabbath, she traced the boundary hedge, brambles snagging her woolens like insistent barbs, peering through a rent where pickets sagged askew. Nettles thigh-high, gingerbread trim molting in leprous patches. Every pane begrimed save the attic's, a flawless disc polished amid the soot, as if a gaze had wiped it clear to peer out. She rationalized diurnal inspections she'd overlooked, yet unease seeded, a prickle along her nape like unobserved eyes. The ensuing mart, the gleam ignited two breaths antecedent to one, that infinitesimal variance raising follicles in spectral salute. Sequentially, it advanced, 58 past midnight, then 6 in 50, each regression etching deeper into Clara's repose, fraying dreams into tatters of vigilance. She forewent slumber, cocooned in Afghan on the stoop, thermos clutched like talisman, vapor curling into the void as she monitored the casement's glow, the manse a black monolith pierced by that solitary umber. She summoned the township watch non-urgent line, phrasing it airy as mist, recounting the anomaly in the derelict stead. The dispatcher pledged a patrol. An hour hence, a prowler ghosted the lane, idling at the verge, being sweeping the facade before gliding onward into obscurity. The luminescence endured, mocking. Morrow bore her to the borough archives, a brick bastion reeking of ledger ink and sepia decay, querying proprietorship amid the clerk's incurious tap. The folio yielded Eastern Valley Holdings, a conglomerate cipher. Their line yielded only automated susurrus, callback of phantom pledge. Thus, when the gleam flared at 2 and 50 past 12 that vigil, Clara traversed the divide, rationalizing a courteous hail, a query to shatter the hush. She breached the hedge's maw, tendrils hissing against denim, mounting the rear gallery where timbers sagged like wearied spines. The radiance pulsed overhead, casting elongate umbras that danced like supplicants. She rapped the jamb and voiced, "Hello?" The edifice exhaled that cavernous resonance of voids profound, floorboards groaning in distant reply. The latch yielded to twist, portal parting a span afore wedging against an unseen bulwark, perhaps a cetea askew. "Hello?" she repeated, timber fracturing on the chill. The glow rendered the gloaming abysmal by contrast. She thrust anew, unyielding, retreat beckoning when a susurrus percolated through the shell, a velvet shuffle, akin to stockinged soles on broadloom. She petrified. The rustle ceased, then a protracted sigh, proximal, as if exhaled across her clavicle. She whirled, void embracing her, and bolted havenward, brambles lacerating in frantic passage. She sequestered indoors till Aurora's reluctant gold, the gleam extinguishing at 5 and 31. Thereafter she chronicled in ledger, ink a frail ward against unraveling. The ignition regressed inexorably, near faltering. Sporadically a shade traversed the pane, amorphous, evading form. Occasionally she doused her lavatory's bulb, peering through slat crevices for oblique vantage, once discerning a contour erect in the chamber, immobile, unswaying, merely extant, as if awaiting appraisal. Mid-autumn, the gleam kindled at 10 and 20 past 11. That meridian, a placard affixed the manse's portal proclaimed auction imminence. Solace bloomed fleeting. That eve, at 3 ante-meridian, percussion assailed her boudoir transom, gentle initial, escalating to imperative. She stirred not, gaze averted, Afghan drawn as infantile aegis, persisting till the tattoo ebbed. Dawn unveiled the mesh distorted, lacquer marred by stipples inexplicable. She invoked the watch anew. A bailiff circuited the perimeter, deeming it fauna's frolic. Common enough, he opined, uninquiring of the luminescence. Fortnight hence, she roused to an incongruity in Willowbrook's serene pall, a rasp of bristles on planking adjacent, methodical, enduring 7 breaths ere cessation. The gleam quenched at 5 and not 3, its retrograde unyielding. Morrow, a lorry from Valley Sanitation, encroached the drive, duo and hazmat descending with crates ingressive, egress barren-handed. Ritual iterated hourly ere depanchment. That eve, the gleam absented, Clara perching stoop-bound till daybreak's pall, expectation of ice. Ensuing eve, void persisted. Tertiary slumber claimed her on the Chesterfield, inaugural in epochs. Midway through the sable, she surfaced to a presence in the scullery, contour lofty, attenuate, visage obscured penumbra. Motionless she, respiration suspended, the shade loitered eons, then pivoted toward the corridor, tread soundless on vinyl. It attained the alcove and inclined its crown herward. In street lamp seepage, a disc abraded pristine on sullied veneer, mirroring the attic's vigilant circle. Clara's digits quavered to mobile, beam lancing the void, scullery barren, corridor vacant, boudoir portal secured.
Epics alighted into strung tautness, Clara circumventing the sunroom's prospect. Repast gulped in the vestibule beneath the pendulum's inexorable tick that conspired with the manse's spectral vigil. She messaged kin Amelia in Harrisburg, inflection cloaked in fictions of warped eaves and solitarial chafe, her quiff splintering like hoarfrost. Amelia intuited the fissures, proffering sojourn, but Clara parried with climb bulletins and pigment proofs forwarded in precipitous salvos. The transom bore freshets by Prime's hem, lithe as talon scratches, spiraling into curlicues intimating ocular orbits if regarded obliquely. She burnished them one pewter meridian, pumice tailings coiling like conundrums, but crepuscule disclosed renewed excoriations, profounder, lettering watcher in spasmodic flourish. Skepticism ulcerated, animal dredging Stygian rebukes, the liaison's dissolution in her inattentive haze, lovers' entreaties muted by canvas thrall, kin's estrangement sans valediction, her isolation a cicatrix self-inflicted. The cottage magnified these undulations, joists murmuring arraignments in the zephyr's lisp. She forayed to Willowbrook's conservancy, a fieldstone reliquary exhaling musty codex and idyllic quiescence, calming annals beneath the custodian's shrouded heed. The manse's codicil emerged in cart. Beatrice Hale, relict of the miller, sequestered post her progeny's plunge into the Brandywine's maw, her vigil reputed to ensorcel casements, replaying vigils till equanimity frayed. Clara's quill hovered, the annals dateline syncing with her lover's egress, one sharp, the Sabbath of the unheeded missive that ossified her solitude. Serendipity, she demurred. Yet repatriation devolved through spindrift shrouds, defogger wheezing vein, the console pane misting with exhalation that scripted watcher in rhyme calligraphy. Night enwrapped Laurel Lane in jet, a borealis thundering from the Appalachians, bows scourging casement like retributive thongs. Clara buttressed the transom with dowel braces, mallet thuds drown in the maelstrom's bay, through straining versus the ineluctable. Atticward, she ransacked the walnut coffer of her provenance, billets from the lover's sepia-hued like stigmata. You saw only shadows on canvas, blind to the ones we cast. She immolated them in the grate, holocaust ravenous on vellum into acrid nebula that spiraled like claws, yet residua gyred skyward, reconstituting in the updraft as Beatrice's susurrus. Dearest, the light beholds. Hysteria peaked. Clara beset the hedge's breach, brambles lacerating a new and feral passage, mounting the gallery where planks yawed like treacherous planks. The casement gleamed, disc pristine amid grime, a gaze inverted. She assailed the portal, shoulder bruising on unyielding bulk, when a rasp percolated, bristles methodical on joist, proximate as marrow. She recoiled, hedge ensnaring in retreat, and dashed cottageward, barricading in the sunroom amid hampers of fusty smocks, reeking of turp and desolation. The borealis colonnaded at Compline,
rafters intoning coronach, and at 10 and 2 score, the gleam burgeoned from the turret, Beatrice's susurrus inflating to ululation that convulsed the sills. Dearest, behold us, the void absolves nil. Clara plummeted to the boundary in the preprandial interregnum, prybar quivering in vice, and rent the hedge asunder, tendrils rupturing like frangible packs. The chasm gaped, weeds lacerated, a paraffin lantern throned on dais of mildewed ledger, wick sputtering mesmeric, its stratified luminosities, Beatrice's vigils interwoven with her own, the lover's stricture veining through like aureate filament. She atomized it anon, bar plummeting in delirious ellipses, glass crumpling to chaff, wick unraveling into ebony threads that cavorted like fugitive essences. The borealis sundered with the paramount stroke, quiescence deluging like reflux surge, endowing solely the valley's stoic suspiration. Daystar sundered iridescent, spheres shivered on swell brows, warblers darting in ironic emancipation. Clara proffered the cottage unviewed, boxing pallet and kettle into the hatchback, Laurel Lane receding in the reflector like molted dermis. Yet as she surmounted the rise to veils, a gleam stirred in the dash, a stray prism, its facet orifice exhaling Beatrice's lilt. Dearest, the path beholds likewise. Semesters hence, in a boisterous Harrisburg airy, resounding with the boulevard's snarl and atelier prattle, Clara roused at 10 and 2 score nightly, the gleam of pulsation in her vault, luminosities lacing ducts and vents. She forswore pigment, but every wash's shading birthed resonances, Beatrice's pre-entwining with her lover's tenuous summons, alluring her to cataract-spanning torrent gulfs where the cascade caroled of remission. Amelia alighted and unearthed her delineating vacant visages in pastel smudges, and exhorted psychotherapy's aseptic radiance, but Clara rebuffed with the grimmest glaze at Brinks. She disseminated the prism's leavings in the Susquehanna one nebula-shrouded crepuscle, fragments plunging like plumbered professions, but billows-hued sigils on the lamina. Behold, the luminosity subsisted, not in glass or wick, but intercalated in the zephyr's exhalation, the drizzle's drum, summoning her to the limon where purgation foundered in the crevice. In serene vigils, limbing crevices in the lathe like sinews, she divined the suction, unyielding as cascade, Beatrice's disc perforating the call, her own reproaches flottant like jetsam, the egress she couldn't forestall, the lover she couldn't reclaim, the kin she couldn't redeem. The void invoked unceasingly, a litany of the forsaken, lingering for her gaze to fuse the gulf. Midway through the subsequent the manse welcomed incumbents, a quartet with progeny, and a hound that bayed at phantoms in the sward every meridian at 3 and 12. The attic burgeoned nursery, drapes yellowest as jaundice. Nocturnally, sporadically, the fold stirred sans proximity. 2 eves antecedent, at 10 and 2 score past 11, a subdued gleam kindled for one respiration ere quiescence. Clara forewent the ledger.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more terrifying stories.